Good afternoon. So happy to see you all here. My name's Allison Bainbridge, and it is my pleasure, ultimate pleasure, to welcome you to Book Passage today. I'd like to also welcome our viewers watching virtually. I love that we can offer both live and virtual events. It's so great, so everybody can attend. People from all over the country. We've even had people internationally. So thank you all for tuning in. So I never take for granted how fortunate and blessed we are in the Bay Area to have so many incredible local authors. Our bookstore wouldn't be here if it weren't for so many of those authors. And today's event celebrating the paperback version of Less is Lost is a perfect example of that. Author Andrew Sean Greer is one of our own, and I mean that both as a local author as well as a wonderful friend and supporter of Book Passage. He always comes here when his books are out, and we're just so grateful for that. Um, so he had me with Confessions of Max Tivoli. It was a Book Passage first edition's pick, and our event director, Karen, who's watching, hi Karen, but isn't here, reminded me that the first line of that, we are each the love of someone's life, is one of the most beautiful lines written, and I have to concur. It's just so beautiful. Um, so Andrew has a way of creating characters that are unique and endearing and relatable and unforgettable. I mean, that's such a talent. And how lucky are we that he brought back the lovable Arthur Less for an unforgettable road trip across America? The only thing I'm disappointed at is that he's not a real character, because if he was, I would insist that he become a travel guide and take me with him on one of his travels, because that's exactly how I would want to travel with someone like him. Um, so go get lost somewhere. It always does you good. This is a line from the book that I could make my mantra, quite honestly. Less is Lost is a profound and joyous novel about the enigma of life in America, the riddle of love, and the stories that we tell along the way. What else? What more can we ask for? Andrew Sean Greer is the Pulitzer Prize-winning author of 6 works of fiction, and he lives just over the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. We are also so fortunate today to have in conversation with Andrew Rita Bullwinkel. She's the prize winning author of Headshot and Belly Up. She's going to be conversing with him today about Less is Lost. She's an editor at large for McSweeney's, the deputy editor of The Believer, and a contributing editor for Noon. She also lives in San Francisco. She teaches at the California College of Arts and University of San Francisco, and we welcome her family who's here today as well. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to them. So please give a warm welcome to Andrew Sean Greer and Rita Bullwinkel.
Like, Not, I mean, we have really packed the house today with family members. I think half of
We
the,
have.
it's like an old time book reading in the 90s or something when all your family would come.
Absolutely. Andrew, I'm wondering if you wanted to start our conversation today talking about how Less is Lost just so miraculously in the tradition of the first book Less is framed in joy. I feel like so much of contemporary fiction, especially contemporary literary fiction, um, isn't in that frame of joy. And I loved diving back into the narratives of Les and experiencing his joyful experience of the world. What was it like to write in that register again?
That's a really, that's a really lovely question. I'm nervous to talk about it because my boyfriend Enrico is here who watched me writing it, which and not an atmosphere of joy. Um, but I don't think that has anything to do with like what you're trying to the effect you're trying to create on the page. I mean,
Mhm.
less I wrote because I uh, I thought there was a gap on my bookshelf, which was a gay love story that didn't end in tragedy.
Absolutely.
And I
Yeah.
also because I was like, where's the like you go to Pride or actually today is one of the high leather holidays in San Francisco, and you see joy, right? You see a ebullient, like over the top experience of joy. And where is that in the fiction sometimes?
I absolutely.
And so I was like, well, I guess I have to write it. That's what Toni Morrison said about the gap on your shelf. And Less is Lost was a lot of it was because it was in a hard time. It was after Trump had won, and then there was this pandemic thing,
Yeah.
and I had did it for myself. Yeah, like the way we all
Yeah.
did those silly, joyous things just to remind us why we were bothering to stay alive. That people would play violins outside each other's windows, or dress up in costumes and go on Instagram, or have cocktails in the backyard, or my friend every birthday that my friends had was like we'd have a parade down the street in front of their house kind of
You're
thing.
right. It's amazing that I've already started to almost forget that was what it was like right at the beginning, that there was that need for joy. I feel like you can feel it in the book so potently. Yeah. Which leads into my next question, which is about love and about love stories. Um, do you mind if I?
I'm going to say out loud again, thanking Rita for doing this, because it puts all the burden on her, and I just sit here, and it's not fair. So those people who come and buy both of our books get to go to the front of the line.
um, I hope it's all right. I'm gonna read a paragraph, which I think is one of the most beautiful paragraphs about love I've ever read, um, and puts this book firmly in the realm, for me at least, of a love story, which is just so challenging. So I'm interested to know how you relate to it as a love story. But okay, the paragraph on page, if you want to read along, on page 253 of the paperback. Because to love someone ridiculous is to understand something deep and true about the world, that up close it makes no sense. Those of you who choose sensible people may feel secure, you're but I think you water your wine. The wonder of life is in its small absurdities, so easily overlooked, and if you have not shared somebody's tilted view of the horizon, which is the actual world, tell me, what have you really seen? Oh, just one of the most beautiful paragraphs about love I've ever read. Um, how do you relate to this book as a love story? When people are like, "This is a love story," are you like, "Oh yes, of course it is," or are you like, "Oh no, no, maybe it's more complicated than that"?
Well, you know how it is when you finish a book, you don't really know what you've written, and
Right.
that's why we have editors and
Right.
things to tell us what they think it is we
Yes.
made, and then you have to sort of you have to realize that you did that instead of something else. Um, I did not think I was writing a love story in particular. I thought I was writing an important political artifact about America, and
Which
the
it also
universe.
is, absolutely.
Because every time you start a book, you think this one's going to be about everything. It's going to be 5,000 pages long. And then by the end, you end up with like this one of these little books about a few things. Um, the, and that paragraph in particular, was going to cut.
Oh.
Um, but one person who read the book was David Sedaris, and he did a very nice thing for me, which was that he told me all of his favorite parts, and I was like, well, if David Sedaris likes it, I'm not going to cut it. And then
Oh,
everyone quotes it back to me, and I thought it was too much. I thought it was over the top. Um, because the book I wrote was about like what happens after the happy ending. Because Les has a very definitive ending. If you've read it, I don't want to give it away, but there's no reason for a sequel. Not necessary. In fact, it kind of ruins it because you like to think there's going to be a happy ending. And I was like, well, okay, let's go on and see what happens. And I thought a lot, to tell the truth, about Enrico living with me as I was working on a book and how annoying that must be. And I thought sometimes, from his point of view, a kind of is it worth it feeling. And and of course the answer is yes. That's what the book is about. It's a note to Enrico saying, "Isn't it worth it, honey?"
I feel like there are other parts in the story as well that really made it feel to me like it was depicting love in a more true and electric way than I've seen depicted elsewhere on the page. I'm thinking specifically of when um, Freddie meets Freddie, our narrator, goes and meets Jason, the psychologist, who he has like a very, very, very brief but very powerful um, kind of debate with about what it means to have human touch. And in that way, the discussion of love and what it means to live a life with someone, or witness a life with someone, or touch someone, how those can sometimes all be the same thing or be disparate things. And um, yeah, I'm
I'm
that
so glad to bring that up. Almost no one talks about that part
I
because I think they
love.
don't make it that far in the book before
Oh,
they
that's so
talk to me
good.
on stage. But that's my sort of pandemic. Clearly, I wrote it in the pandemic when we hadn't
Yes.
touched each other for a while, and that there was
Oh,
an old friend of mine who had died not long before, an Italian man who'd had a heart condition in his 30s, and his doctor said, "You're going to have to choose love or cheese,"
oh my gosh. I thought, you know,
and he chose cheese. And I thought, and I had to put it in the book because I thought there's something there that's about that choice of love or cheese that we each have to make, or we try to have our love and cheese too.
yeah, and maybe die early or something.
Well, like, how do you? Because we all have to deal with this in our fiction. How to get close to these super red hot emotional topics without tripping over? Because if you start to get sentimental, you go off the cliff. You know?
Yeah, it's so it is challenging. Um, I don't know how anyone does. I don't know how you do it.
Why are you not answering about yourself? It's okay.
How do I do it? Oh, I'm not sure. Um, Sentimentality, it is something that it's very it can feel dangerous on
It's
the
dangerous.
page. It feels like almost like maybe it can feel like the worst thing. And I feel like maybe as a writer it's something I could risk more. Um and maybe with a book I have coming out in March, I've maybe tried to risk it more than with my story collection.
Good. I
Um
think also our peers sometimes, especially when we're younger, can be very cruel about sentimentality in the way they aren't about
Absolutely.
like bloodshed and gore.
Oh my God. Yes. Yeah, there's so much, yeah, so much applause for that I don't necessarily agree with about bloodshed and gore. I mean, there is this thing that I think in broad strokes that can happen in the contemporary literary landscape that is about brutality and reflecting the brutality of the world back in fiction. And that is true. Like the world is brutal and awful and full of hate and terrible things. And there are so many writers who I admire who are able to show me that in a way that goes beyond even what I've been able to understand previously. But I do feel like there is a dearth on my bookshelf, as you were talking about, of just reflecting the reasons why we find wonder in the world. And I think risking that and risking sentimentality is it can feel so dangerous because it feels like maybe there's bigger repercussions than just reflecting back the brutality that is there and that we see, especially, who knows, times they've probably always been brutal, but they feel maybe especially brutal right now. Andrew, another question I was interested to ask you is in Less, we do get a little bit of the Bay Area. There's the amazing, regretfully fictitious Russian River School. We get some Baker Beach, but in Less is Lost, we really start in San Francisco and we see what I have never seen depicted before in literature. The Columbarium, this like amazing San
Have
Fran.
you all ever been
It's
there?
incredible. Okay,
It's this. I mean, I've known about it for a very long time. It is sort of at. Um, it's on. What is it near? It's near the what used to be the Kinko store on Stanyon and Geary. Um, there you go, the base
yeah,
of Lone Mountain, and
yep.
it's this Beaux-Arts building that is a place to store ashes, and so each person gets a little niche, and the older ones are much more stately, of just like a carved iron thing, and then later someone got the bright idea that it could be glass, and that you could fill it with other things. And then it was I may not have this precisely right, but during the beginning of the AIDS crisis, most cemeteries would not accept gay men's bodies after they died, but the crematorium would, the columbarium. And so at around 1982, you start seeing all of these glass niches that are filled with like red ruby slippers and teddy bears and takeout Chinese food, and it's just unbelievable the real personality that starts to come out, and that continues to this day. They've built annexes where other people have, and you get sports equipment and CDs, and so that's I was like, well, that's I've never seen that anywhere but San Francisco, and I had to start the book there because I wanted to have a funeral that was funny or full of joy, because you go to the columbarium and it clearly is these celebrations of life.
Yeah.
Not one of those niches is like, I mean, they make you cry and cry, but they're not wreathed in black.
No, it's such a beautiful place that feels so of the Bay Area and of this place we're in. And I was um I feel like there just also aren't that many contemporary depictions of San Francisco in literature, especially not ones that are touching on places that are, I feel like, essential to hear, like the Columbarium. I was so excited to see it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of places that have been covered, and so it feels great to find one that I was like, I don't think Daniel Handler hasn't written about this place yet. He usually
Right,
gets
right,
all the
right.
good ones. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, okay. I was also interested if you would be willing to talk to a character in the book.
Wow. Yeah.
Thomas, who plays our wonderful protagonist in a play version adaptation of his work, which is this kind of amazing doubling, right? Where you have the protagonist and then you have an actor in the novel playing the protagonist who's giving kind of insights to Les back about his life. He was such an amazing double. How did you come up with him? Have you ever had um, any of your work adapted? What was that like?
I've almost never had anything adapted, but I did have a San Francisco group called Word for Word, which is an amazing theater troupe, and they do pieces of fiction word for word, and so it's mostly short stories.
Incredible.
Yeah, um, and they performed a story of mine here, and then they went on every year. They go on a tour of France, and they took me along. They got a
Wow.
grant to take me along on the tour so that we would go to all these cities in France, and they would perform this show in English, and then I would come on stage and answer questions, and I would stay in like people's just normal people's bedrooms. They had set guest rooms
That
and
sounds
stuff.
very fun.
Yeah, it was pretty fun. The extra fun part was that there was a set they had made and shipped over, and that we had to get from one place to the other by train, and it was not allowed on the train. It was like boulders and trees and things. And so whenever the train conductor would come along to for tickets, we would, I forget what someone would say, and we would all go in the bathrooms with our piece of the set. I had a boulder and lock the bathroom until they went by to hide the set. And we did this every day for 2 weeks.
Oh my God.
And the sweetest part was that there was, not to go on too long, there was like a leaf door, like a golden book where people write how they felt about them, the play at the end. And there was one in Paris where a woman had written, I understood nothing, but it was a beautiful show. And I want that on my tombstone.
Yeah, that is a wonderful
It's just
takeaway.
like a great, I'm so glad. But therefore that wasn't me though. You know, it wasn't a story about me, this Islander story. Um, and in fact, it was only in a late draft. There was always a play going on to get him
Uh-huh.
through the South, but it was only in a late draft where a friend, Julie Oringer, read the book and she said, well, why isn't the play a story about him? Like, why are you making it this a short story he wrote about something else? Why don't you make it about the characters in the book and his sister and things and his father? And then suddenly I could have a double and have him watch himself being portrayed. And also, I wanted this doubling of race in the book. I feel
Yes.
nervous doing this too because I try to make the book really shiny and so that it's a joy to read and not let everyone know that actually I've secretly hidden like content in it. But that is, I wanted the race doubling to happen. It happens a
Yes,
few times in the book.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, another thing that is depicted in this book that I have never seen depicted in contemporary literature um, is your completely faithful rendering to me of the emotional experience of visiting a plantation and how bizarre and varied of an experience that can be. And the that seems like such a difficult thing to render on the page for all sorts of you know obvious reasons, the brutality, the history there, but also the bizarreness that in the South, at least in my experience, I lived in Nashville for several years. A lot of these plantations are can be treated as like wedding venues or like boutique wine bars, and the really strange and upsetting dissonance that that can cause, and also just like the people watching of who's there, the trying to discern why different people have come to this place. And Arthur Less was the perfect person with which to witness that American tragedy, but also the contemporary dissonance of what it feels like to visit a plantation now. That must have been an incredibly difficult thing to write.
I tell you, it didn't seem like I was. I will say this: I went on 6 weeks. I rented a car, a van, for two different 3 week periods after Trump won. And I was like, I don't understand my country. I'm going to visit the parts that I've never been to, not to embrace others, but just to, I don't know, get some sense of who these people could possibly be. And um, and on my second trip in the deep south, where my family's from, my lovely mother is right here, not from the deep south. They're from South Carolina, which is okay. They don't feel that way in Mississippi. When I tried to say I was from the south, I didn't buy that. But it is hard, or I think it's actually really easy to try to pretend it's not there. But for me, just seeing cotton blowing over the road
Yeah,
just gives you chills, knowing the history of that cotton.
yeah.
And I thought I have to go visit these places of former enslavement, and I went to three. I went to one where the quarters of the enslaved people had all been blown away 100 years ago, and there was just the house of the planters, and it was like they do it up for Christmas and the whole Gone with the Wind thing. And I went to another one, the Whitney Plantation outside of New Orleans, which is the story of slavery. And you don't go in the big house, you only go to the slave cabins because they say, only 5 or 6 people ever lived in that house. And there were thousands of us. Let's tell this story. And the first one was obviously like not something I could write about. The second one was like visiting Auschwitz, and it just wasn't funny. And then I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. And I went to another one, Frogmore Plantation in Alabama. And what I wrote down in the book is exactly what my experience was, which was a what was funny was the me and the other white people on the tour when we thought we were on one tour and it switched on us. Like we went in to watch the history of cotton, like a video presentation, but from this elderly white woman who was very bored, like a school teacher. And then
Hmm.
um, when it was over, a black woman came out and she said, "Well, now we're going to go on the rest of the tour." And we're all like, "Oh, hi!" And she takes us along, and the house where the planter had lived had burned down 1 week before. And she's like, "Well, we didn't need to see that anyway." Um, and she started to speak in the second person. She would say, "Here we are at the smokehouse. You gave us 2 pounds of hogs every week for a family of four," and the whole tour was in second person. And she would say, now, us children, we used to lie down on the floor, and everyone is freaking out that they had been tricked into this experience. And I realized that's what's funny. We're funny. And we're doing everything. And I'm watching myself and the other white people get super nervous and try to change the conversation. And I put it in the book that the last thing that one of the elderly women asked her was, how much does a bale of cotton weigh?
Yeah.
And she said, "The Lord has so blessed me, ma'am, that I do not know." The Holy Spirit was just extraordinary.
I mean, one of the things that I stood in awe and read in awe of that section that I feel like encompasses my reading of the whole book, that I'm not doing a very good job of centering in on, is that it's not that Arthur Less has not experienced, both witnessed brutality and also experienced trauma in his life. That the joyful effervescence in the book does not it does not negate the reality that he has had, and we learn about through his narratives, had really horrible things both happen to him, and that he also is very aware of the absolute brutality and horribleness of humankind and what humans are capable of. I mean, within the book, he both senses danger for being a gay man several times, and then experiences like a very dangerous situation. And still somehow, in the narration of the book, there is this feeling that these living here on Earth, there are horrible, unspeakable, evil things that have happened and that have the potential to happen again. But that maybe still there is some beauty here to be found in each other, which I just is such a challenging thing, I think, to communicate with art. And you did so masterfully in that section
That
as
is
in
the
elsewhere.
kindest thing you could say, because that's the project, and it's hard for me to say anything about it because it took me 2 books to express it. So I'm not sure I could say any more in real words. But it's my experience of life, or maybe it's what I want to keep telling myself. Even on that tour of that Frogmore plantation, just talking to the guide and asking her about her family, you could see she suddenly lit up with joy, and she broke her own character and talking about her sister and how they teased each other. And I thought, it's there, you know, we're all have access to it. And she's going to go home and have a great time. She needed to be strict with us.
Yeah.
It was just the humanity of it was really gave me a lot of different emotions.
Yeah. I just think I read so many books where the narrative consciousness of the book, I feel like, not necessarily the author, but the narrative consciousness of the book, I get this feeling that if the narrative consciousness of the book was struck by a bus and God or whatever supreme being came down and was like, okay, you have a choice. You can either like come back, like we'll give you a new body, you get another go around, or you can just tap out now. There's a lot of narrative consciousnesses that I feel like would just be like, I'm this is I don't need to come back. But the consciousness of less is lost, I just feel like they would be like, absolutely. There's a lot left to see. Put me in again, coach.
I think that's what each of the books is. At the end, there's a moment where Arthur Less could be like, definitely giving up. I'm going to
yeah.
be trapped in this paper room forever and die.
Yeah.
Or bust out like Godzilla. Yeah.
Yeah. Um okay, so obviously this is a Less is Lost is miraculously, amazingly a sequel. What was the experience of going back to the character? Will we see more of Arthur Less? What are you working on now?
I got to say, it is now like a trend to Colson Whitehead just wrote a sequel himself. Can you believe it? I mean, I was like, I hope he's getting all the questions I got about, but there were a lot of people. There was Elif Batuman wrote a sequel, and who am I thinking of? Frances McDormand portrayed the character in the television series Olive Kitteridge. Yeah. Um, I Fargo's great too. It's certainly against my agent's advice, because like you can't sell the movie rights on a sequel if the first one's not a movie. But I was compelled to do it, and then it was great fun. Great fun because I had all the characters I wanted already there, and I could pick minor ones out and make them bigger characters, and I could add a father character and a sister who weren't in the first one, and it's very and during the pandemic, it was a great comfort to be in a storytelling. This will make sense to you. A storytelling style that could take me anywhere I wanted to go.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense.
That's it. When you discover a narrative strategy,
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to let it go.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't. I was just greedy. And the one I'm working on right now is not an Arthur Less novel, although it is still a life-affirming comedy. Um, but it's set in Italy because that's the material I have available right now is Italy.
Very excited. I can't wait to read.
It's not very far along yet.
um, Elaine, how are we doing on time?
That sounds.
Wh-
I had a question. I think you keep touching on a topic that I find really interesting. That maybe it's not as funny to people, but talking about portrayal of brutality and choices we have as writers about
Yes.
how to approach the hard things in
Yeah.
life. And it's something I think about a lot. That I think recently I started being feeling a little critical of some artists who I feel are. Um, Now I've forgotten the name of the dancer from the dance filmmaker. Um, I'm so glad no one knows him. Um, anyway, Google it later. But he's the one. Every one of those movies, it feels like he wants you to suffer needlessly.
Mm.
And and I thought, you know what? While we're just making things up, why would you make something up to make the reader miserable? I mean, since it isn't true, like why not go the other way? I've just started to feel that more and more when I was like, I sometimes think that's the easy way out. What if you went through that emotion into comedy, which is what I think comedy is it's not sidestepping the
No.
hard stuff. It is, I sat in that plantation and I thought, I have to sit with this long enough that I can find out what's funny about it. Like, I have to sit longer than I am at all comfortable with. And I can't, the easy way out would for me to say, like, oh, this is just awful. But if I implicate myself in it, which is unpleasant, that's where the comedy is. So I have to sit with that for a long time. And I start to get um, uh, irritated like an old man at some of the um uh the apocalyptic storytelling that we all have right now because I'm like we
Yeah,
already have it in our heads.
I
Every
know.
single person has it. We don't actually need the movie of it.
No, we don't. No, I guess it was in 2021. I taught a class on utopias for maybe a similar reason. It felt like
What was in that class? What did you come out with?
I taught it at CCA, and I didn't only have writers, I also had architects and painters and things in the class. And some of the most inspiring stuff we looked at was visual artists, honestly. It was the science fiction writers, I think, can do a better job of imagining utopias than some maybe other literary genres. But maybe my favorite thing we looked at was uh, this series of shaker benches made by a sculptor who was recreating all the different ways of sitting that different um, idealistic or utopian communities invented for sitting in community. And that had some really interesting implications. But I would say the literature was one of the more difficult things to find. I mean, Ursula Le Guin's Left Hand of Darkness, I mean, has some very dark aspects, but I think um, does point to some ways in which there could be a possibility for a different society if we looked at gender differently. What else did we look at? Oh gosh, why did I bring this up? I couldn't
I'm
remember
so
my
glad
whole
you brought it up.
syllabus.
That's a hard one. Like I don't know if it would. Well, I will say that going all the way back, I remember when I first was thinking about lesson, I had a student
Mm-hmm.
who we would like to sit and argue in a bar. It was great fun. And he said, you can't write a novel about joy because nothing happens. There's no drama to it. And so that would be part of the utopia drama problem would be either it has to be about building the utopia
Right.
or a threat to the utopia or like
True.
a diamond heist in the like something else has to happen. It can't just be happy all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I was like, yeah, I can. Well, I think you had something. So I decided in both of these books, I thought if I take everything away from the character, then I can reward at the end. And rather than it going like this, it kind of goes like that.
Right.
That's a dramatic arc, right?
Yeah.
But
Oh
it's
my,
hard in a utopia.
it is harder. There always has to be some threat, you're right, or some forces that are threatening the idealism. in some way.
Like even the science fictions, I feel like that you set up a utopia and then there's a threat to it and it breaks down and they enter a new, possibly even more hopeful utopia.
Right, right. That is one of the only ways forward. Well, we'll keep trying. We've had enough of no this genre that you're talking about, Andrew. It reminds me of, I feel like there was this period, I think we're done with it, where there was a lot of contemporary poetry about dead dogs.
Oh
No?
no, I'm not aware of
I'm
this.
so glad.
I don't want to
Don't
be part
go.
of that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's terrible. It was like feeling, 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 and then we had to kill a dog. And I feel like that was just, yeah, it felt very, it was so terrible. Never mind.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like mean people and I don't really like mean. It's not what I go to literature for.
No,
Mean.
no. And it was always like the context of the poem was setting up how someone could become so depraved or terrible, or some evil had existed where this was the only thing that could happen. But I'm so glad that um, I think we're out of it.
Oh, thank God. And we're into a more figurative poetry.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's not a lot of, and God knows if I have gotten close to writing one of these, but there are books in my life that I pick up because they're hopeful feeling,
Yeah.
that things like, of all the things Graham Greene wrote,
Yeah.
I like Travels with My Aunt
Yeah.
because it's just ridiculous, and he certainly was dismissive of it as an entertainment, but I like it more than Power and the Glory. I reread it. I don't reread Power and the Glory.
Mm-hmm.
Or like Cold Comfort Farm. Anyone a fan of that old book? Yeah, I just reread it. It's still hilarious 100 years later. And that's a book that's making fun of a whole genre of fiction I'm not even aware of, which is like the British rural, I guess it's something like Wuthering Heights ripoffs. Yeah.
I have to read it.
Oh my God, it's so good.
I'm so excited. It waits for me.
And the best thing about it is that it was written in the 20s or 30s of the last century, and it's futuristic. They
Oh,
talk to each
wow.
other on like video screens. It's the weirdest thing, and you would hardly notice when you read it, except like it's slightly in the future, which allows it to float above reality and be even funnier. But like that's something I think we never talk about is books that are just utterly charming.
Yes.
Like David Sedaris, it's all charm, isn't it? I mean, it's hilarious, but it's his persona and his actual self. He's actually like kinder than he's letting on in the books, which which is why he gets away with like saying those awful things. It's the charm.
Andrew, what else is on your like charm syllabus? I want to read it all.
Oh, this is really good. Actually, there is a book called Happy All the Time,
Oh, wow.
which is super charming. That's Lisa Brown's favorite book.
Amazing.
I like I Captured the Castle by
That is
Dodie Smith.
a beautiful book.
Isn't that one of those where it's like early, almost YA, and yet an adult book?
Yeah.
Heartbreaking, but charming too.
Yeah.
Like, can you think of any charm books?
I'm
I mean, I think this will sound utterly out of date. There are some John Updike books where his language is so charming that I'll
Uh-huh.
go along for a little while with the misogyny.
Mhm.
But there's a charm to the language in that it's just musical, and he's clearly having such a good time that you don't care that, like, the sequel to The Witches of Eastwick is a terrible book, but it's beautifully written. It's just hilariously written on a
Mhm.
language level. And I think a lot of those, like Bellow also,
Yeah.
that they're out of style, and so we're not aware of the probably hard one, but seems easy on the page charm. Or Roth.
I think it has a dark turn at the end, but Rivka Galchin's Everybody Knows Your Mother's a Witch.
Oh
It's
yeah.
very charming in the way that it depicts like village gossip and kind of standing above it. I love that book.
I think maybe Muriel Sparks' entire
That's true.
aunt.
Oh my gosh, Memento Mori, absolutely.
Yeah, you're just like, why did she decide this was good for a book? Just could.
Yeah, yeah, so charming.
Muriel Spark, anyone Muriel Spark fans? Yeah,
Yeah, so good.
they're all good. I know it's a weird topic, but I think about it a lot because I think about how, like right now, I'm struggling with my book because I don't have the same narrator as the last two. I have to come up with a new strategy for it to be engaging without, but I'm a little bit without the any of the tools I perfected in the last two books. I have to start all over, and I'm trying to figure out how to make it still charming. Yeah. But I think I always enjoy that when I pick up a book and it feels different. Sounds different from other books. The way you do it like a party when you talk to someone, often a kid, and they turn to you and they're like, I had a dream last night I was a horse. And you're like, you were interesting. I could
Yeah.
talk to you all night because you didn't get stuck in traffic and want to talk about it.
Right.
Yeah. And that's what I feel about a book. I don't want to open a book and have it be stuck in traffic story. I want to dream they were a horse.
I couldn't agree more.
It's we can open up to some questions if you want.
Great.
I think does that sound cool? Let's use it because I know a lot of people don't always hear everything we're saying.
Hi, thank you very, very much. I loved Less. I'm halfway through Less is Lost
Oh,
and
good.
loving that as well. And I'm curious because after I read Less, I spoke to a lot of different people about it. Older people, younger people, men, women, a very diverse group of people, and we all loved Less. And my question is, Andrew, as a writer, if in fact you do write for your audience, who were you thinking would buy the books?
For you, ma'am. Absolutely for you. I gotta say, nobody. Nobody. When I wrote Less, I thought no one's gonna buy this book because and that gave me the the confidence to do whatever I wanted. I can't believe so many people have read things that are just like totally embarrassing. I just thought no one ever was going to read it. So I put things of my real life in there that are totally humiliating. And luckily, people read it as fiction and they don't know about me. And some of it isn't true. But like, I just can't believe what's in that book that people read. And that was the problem with writing the sequel is that clearly people, it was because it was a total shock to me that that it won a Pulitzer Prize. And then after that, that I don't know, I guess a million people bought it. I don't know if they all read it, but I hear from people every single day on Instagram from India. It could be like a 19-year-old girl in India. It could be a man in Iran. It could be an elderly person in Vermont every day. And it's all kinds of people. And I just am overwhelmed with how grateful I am that that happened. And it's because of the Pulitzer Prize that it came to people's attention. Obviously, that's why people bought it. And then it's word of mouth at places like Book Passage that so this one, I wasn't trying to squeeze as much as I could at the moment. I part of it was like these I wanted to write more, and I thought that I had readers who because people took it in an interesting way. It wasn't like a gay rights book. Like for a lot of young women in India write to me and they see it as a story of romantic freedom, like they would like themselves. And or I get a message from someone turning 25. I get a lot of those about um, sort of a rite of passage in age, and how they totally identify with Arthur Less. And it's of course it's easy to snicker about the idea of 25 being an important passage, but it is, you know. Clearly it is. They wrote to me about it and they connected with turning 50, and turning 50 is a ridiculous rite of passage if you've turned 75. I'm aware it's all ridiculous and that I'm perfectly young, and I communicate that to them. Um, and all that's just amazing that I get to do that. And um, and I think it's why I'm still writing another. The next one is also a comedy because I thought I love writing it, and apparently there's people who want to read it. Or sometimes I think comedy is the wrong thing to say. Like in Italy, it sounds really silly to say that word. They want to say it's an ironic book. Um, But I'm happy to call it as silly a book as you want to. I mean, I'm happy to have Arthur slip on a banana peel. And sometime in the future I'll write a third book but I'm waiting for the topic to hit me. Something that I have no way of understanding unless I look at it through this particular lens. And I think that's what all writing a book is anyway. Oh, I'm so glad. And you got the
Well,
paperback. Good for you.
I just want to say something as a bookseller. So many people come in these days, and because everything is so dark and scary out in the world, often they say, I want something literary but light. And there isn't a lot of that. So by writing these books, you're giving us a big gift as booksellers and as readers, because, like the person you mentioned, David Sedaris, these books are comedy, but they're also very deep, touching characters. And so I think that's the difference as well.
I mean, because David Sedaris, even his diaries are amazing because that's someone who is perfectly honest about the world. And that's what's funny is that I don't think it's funny if people are, I don't think cruelty is funny and I don't think phoniness is funny. I think you have to really be clear about what you think and believe and see. And reading his diaries, you understand that because he's literally just writing it down what he sees, and he's writing for himself. It's a diary, and it's amazing. Yeah. The man in the merman shirt.
Don't you love it?
I love it.
I got it on Facebook, if anyone is wondering. No, I just want to say, I mean, both of these books, there's something you do so well about writing an ending that I felt the same way reading Less and Less is Lost. That like I was going through all these emotions, my heart's racing, I'm like, getting short of breath. And for those of you who have not read it, I will not ruin it, but I burst into tears both times after reading the
So
last.
glad to hear that.
But it was because of the joy that it was like that overwhelming sense of joy. And both times it's hilarious because I think I recommend Less all the time to people. And when Less is Lost came out, my friend bought it for me. Like the second she saw it on the bookshelf was like, I'm getting this for you for your birthday. Months in advance, she knew how much I would love it. And this is something I've wanted to ask you, and it's probably I don't know if it was intentional or not. I'm really hoping it is because it's like a little detail that I'm like, he's a genius. Did you mean for the last words of each book to rhyme? Did you realize they did?
Not until this moment.
Either way, then you're unintentionally
Well,
a genius.
except I did in this sense that I knew in Less is Lost that that it rhymes with less.
Mhm.
So I was very aware of that. And not to sound overly pretentious, but the end of Less is meant to imitate the end of Ulysses, where he says, yes, I said yes, I said yes.
Yes.
And so that's why it rhymes with that. And so
Okay,
all of that's
incredible.
super involved. And but I knew how to end both books very early on in writing them, which is something I really like to do when I'm writing, because then you can go anywhere you want because you know where you're ending up, like a road trip. You're
Right.
like, well, I have to be at my mom's birthday in Washington, but let's go to Michigan.
Absolutely.
That's how it feels. I'm so glad. I really worked hard on those endings.
They're perfect. Like I cannot. Every time when people ask me, I'm like, no. I tell them get like the ending of the book is like the most perfect thing you'll ever read. Both. I'm like, you did it twice. That's what blew my mind.
Wow. Are you a writer?
I have a degree in English. I'm an actor.
Oh, okay.
One of my degrees is in English, though.
Well, it's about timing.
Yes.
That's what it is. And I had my friend, our friend Daniel Handler, certainly on Less, he would read every draft of the last 20 pages, and he would say, it needs to be shorter, it needs to be faster, Andy, faster, faster. And I would get it down to 4 pages, 3 pages. And finally he said, Andy, he doesn't have to like get on a plane and fly. You can just put ... I walked up to my house. And I was like, okay, that'll shorten it a lot. And if you look at the book, that is what is in there, because he told me, he was like, just cut all this nonsense about like getting in the cab and tipping the taxi driver and getting lost and asking if he was a kindergarten. Like we're moving toward the end, And so I had to learn a lot about timing because I hadn't written comedy before and how to do it. And so I would just read them over and over to get the timing right. That's why I cut that part near the end, because I thought it's too long. I need to cut things. So it was. But then the other comedy guy, David Sedaris, liked the paragraph. So
yes.
what do I know?
No,
Thank
phenomenal.
you for that question.
Phenomenal, of course.
And for those of you that are virtual, the person who just asked the question has this wonderful merman shirt on, which is rivaling Andy's shirt, which is fabulous. So.
Well, we're both. I don't know anything about your sexuality, sir. But I think we all know mine.
More questions?
Another example of joyous, when I get dressed, my mother recently told me, she said, Andy, I really like how you're dressing any old which way you like these days. And she meant it as like that I was dressed, like this is ridiculous the way I'm dressed. And it's really fun. Like people will stop me on the street based on what I'm dressed and just say, you look great, sir. And often they say, did you make that yourself? That's the best comment I can get. Do people ask if you made your mermaid man shirt yourself? Okay. Yeah. See, we're already talking about it. It's a conversation starter as an audience member. Learn something. Yes.
Oh, I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the road trip, the inspiration you took from a road trip.
Yeah, I had learned from Les. I was a travel writer for a while, and I had learned that if I was traveling alone, I had a lot of time to sit in a restaurant between courses and take notes on all the little details of the things going on around me that weren't going to make it into the article. And those made it into less. And those details were so important to me because it was my rule in writing less that every detail, every rock and wallpaper had to be something from my notes. I couldn't make it up because I didn't want to write a fantasy of a foreign country. I think that's where you can go really wrong as like a white guy. And so I thought I was going to make the same rule for this one. So I was like, well, I've never been to these places. So I did the same thing. And I rented a camper van. Enrico joined me for the first leg of it. I picked him up in Los Angeles. He'd never been to Los Angeles, and he didn't get to see much because I picked him up and we drove to Joshua Tree. And we went from Joshua Tree to the Salton Sea, and we visited Slab City. Do y'all know about Slab City? Oh gosh, don't go. It's an off-the-grid living situation on between California and Arizona at a decommissioned military base. The slabs are the old concrete slabs, and it is a 1/3 snowbirds, like elderly people who are coming down to the south during the winter months. 1/3 super hippy dippy people who want to live off the grid, and 1/3 kind of a meth addict situation. Into the Wild, that movie, part of it, Catherine Keener, she's in Slab City. So I went there. Enrico and I visited a hostel in Slab City, and it was really eye-opening. So talking about utopians, I tried to visit as many utopias as I could. I went to see Arcosanti, which is in Arizona, and the architect Paolo Soleri, one of Frank Lloyd Wright's students, built this. It was supposed to be a prototype for the city of tomorrow, and they got as far as building the triumphal arch, basically, and that's as far as they got. And he died, and they still haven't progressed very much. But it's interesting. You can go, and it's like a bunch of young hippies living in concrete cubes that he built a long time ago. It's fascinating, and they sell bronze bells to make money. And I feel like there was another one I found too. Anyway, but they made it into the book. I combined them into one sort of commune thing. And I at Slab City, I watched them. They were building a universe appreciation platform that just looked really under-engineered. And I realized I think I have to get Arthur Less on top of that thing. That sounds funny. So that would be what would occur to me. Would not be the way that I wrote about the foreign, like I wrote about in Morocco and less, I found I ended up in a ski resort for some reason, and I was like, this is hilarious. I didn't think they had these in Morocco. I wanted to do that for these other countries, not countries, states that I went to. So things that would surprise me, that surprised me when I went there, and showed my ignorance as well as people's ignorance about me. Like one of my favorite things that I ended up putting in the book was that people thought I was from a foreign country, from the Netherlands. And because they detected something in my voice they couldn't put their finger on. I reminded them of their nephew, and I would think, I know something about your nephew you don't know. But there was just like there was like it wasn't homophobic. They just didn't know gay. They didn't know that's what they were hearing, so they would thought I was therefore foreign, and so I was treated as a foreigner in the place not far from where my family is actually from. And I tried to dress up my mother was very worried about my safety, and so I told people I was from um, Maryland, not San Francisco, and I called people ma'am and sir. And I went to Walmart and I bought an outfit that was like a big T-shirt with a country western band on it, and like those sunglasses that wrap all the way around, and I was like, the disguise is complete. I put American flag in every corner of the van. I mean, I was just, you could see my prejudices I mean, it probably sounds normal to this group, but down there, it was ridiculous. I mean, people are normal. But people were nice to me. And my mother explained to me, she said, you're going to be fine. There's a place for everyone. If you move out of your places where there's trouble. And that felt true.
Got it. Okay, sorry about that. We had a couple comments from people watching virtually. Yeah, one is someone wanted to mention that there's a fascinating focus on the history of American plantations in Clint Smith's How the Word is Passed. And also, someone said Dead Dog's Poetry, Billy Collins, The Revenant. So, in case anyone wants to read about
Oh, gosh, we're naming names. We didn't do it.
they didn't do it, it was a comment. Yeah, exactly. So, any last comments before we wrap up? Well, thank you so much for this incredible conversation, both of you, Rita and Andrew. We
Rita, for
so
doing this.
appreciate this.
Such an honor.
It was lovely. And what we're going to do now is we're going to reset the stage, put a table up so that he can sign. Andrew will sign books. So if
And
you want
Rita
to
will sign books too.
Rita can sign books too. We have all the books available at the registers. Please help yourself. Go on up there, and our staff will help you. And thanks again so much for being here and supporting Book Passage, independent bookstores, and have a wonderful rest of your Sunday. Thank you. And thank you to all those watching virtually.
Thank you all. Thanks, Karen.